Let's bring in business editor Ross Greenwood. Ross, you think those tariffs, if they hit Australia, could spell the end for the Whyalla Steelworks?
Yeah, it really is. It's so sensitive there anyway at the moment. The steelworks there in Whyalla have only just really recommenced operations after 4 months being closed. They'd had an outage in one of their blast furnaces, which had been caused as a result of cooling. There'd been significant numbers of contractors, particularly in its mines, laid off, its iron ore mines. And so it's been losing money for quite some time. Sanjeev Gupta, who runs it through GFG Alliance, is quite clearly troubled financially in other parts of the world, and it really does raise questions about the ability for Australia to continue. Now, the reason why it becomes so sensitive, these tariffs, is not so much because Australia exports a lot of steel to the United States, though BlueScope Steel does export some, which has turned largely into its ColourBond roofing products, but it has plants of its own in America, where the real problem for both Whyalla and also for BlueScope lie with its Port Kembla Steelworks is in Chinese imports to Australia. In other words, if China can't export more of its steel to the United States, then already there is significant amounts of very cheap steel coming into Australia from China. And if that continues to flood into Australia, in particular rail products competing with Whyalla, which is the only rail maker in this country, then there is going to be some significant problems for that operation, which right now is operating at loss with a very debt-heavy company in the form of Sanjeev Gupta's GFG Alliance.
And Ross, what are the chances that Australia could dodge these tariffs? As I spoke to Cameron a short moment ago, like we did in the first Trump administration.
Well, the answer would go back to, say, the $800 million that Australia put down as a down payment for the AUKUS agreement last week. And Donald Trump made very favourable statements about Australia and the relationship with Australia at that time. Remember that Joe Hockey was the one who convinced him, because of Australia's strong backing of the United States in various campaigns of war over a very long time, to convince Donald Trump in his first administration not to put those tariffs on Australian steel. Whether that works this time around remains to be seen. So it really is a delicate art of negotiation now, but it does show that Australia will not be immune from the tariffs that Donald Trump is putting around the world, not just directly, but indirectly through what happens with China's exports to the rest of the world as a result.
And Ross, I want to get your reaction on how the markets are looking at all of this, but also let me put to you as well something Andrew Clennell reported earlier on, and this is the Westpac forecast, which was released ahead of the RBA meeting next week, and they're suggesting that headline inflation for March will be 2%, for June below the band at 1.7% for the year. That's headline. And trimmed mean, they're saying 2.7% for March, 2.4% for the June quarter. This is Lucy Ellis from Westpac, a former RBA official herself.
That's right. In fact, the head of economics at the Reserve Bank, and probably the most senior and recent departure from the Reserve Bank to go into private enterprise. The one thing, Kieran, where you're on the money here is because if you look at the past 2 quarters, the headline rate of inflation in those past 2 quarters has just in each of them been 0.2%. So in other words, there's only 0.4%, give or take, over the past half year. Now, you only have to extrapolate that forward to say that by this time next year, the inflation rate could well be hovering around 1.5% at a headline rate, and that means that the trim mean, the underlying rate, which the Reserve Bank looks at, could well and truly be within that target band. And that is an argument for the Reserve Bank to cut interest rates sooner, to make certain that the inflation rate doesn't suddenly drop well below that target band. So that's one thing, and that's the reason why the markets are betting the Reserve Bank will cut interest rates next week, even though there are strong arguments to say that there is no suggestion that really inflation has completely been tamed in this country. But really, the markets right now are saying there is going to be a cut in interest rates next week. This is what the markets have done in reaction to this talk of tariffs from Donald Trump, down around 0.3%. It's not a massive fall by any stretch of the imagination. If we look at some of the companies out there to see which have been affected, this is the Australian dollar, again down a little bit, because any sort of tariffs tariffs is going to affect Australia, no doubt. So have a look at some of these companies that have turned around. BlueScope Steel has big manufacturing operations in the United States, in Ohio. It would be a winner from these tariffs because that operation would be protected. Sims Metals would be affected by this. Metro Mining, small company, but has some operations. The rest of them really not much affected. But BlueScope's a big one there because of its US operations being really very much protected as a result of these tariffs suggested to be imposed by Donald Trump.